and I want to thank you for being on our first citizen call. I'm doing the citizen campaign calls because I want you to know what's going on with the campaign. I want you to know what the journey is like, what's happening, and what your participation is, which is extremely important. First of all, I want to take a moment and just make sure that you know how grateful I am to you and how much my heart is open to you and how this campaign is a vessel for all of us to join and invite other Americans into a space with us, which is the level of the heart. And I know that there are those who laugh at that, but you know, I see that very, very much like the early days of the AIDS crisis, when there were, you know, doctors who would laugh at those of us who were doing spiritual support groups for people with AIDS. Well, the culture changed. And whereas in the 1980s, there might have been a doctor making fun of the idea of going to a spiritual support group, you live now in a world where the oncologist would probably be the first person to tell you to get over to one of them. Because in the field of medicine, we have now come to accept a more integrative approach to healing as normal. It's now mainstream. So we now need to do with politics the same thing we did with medicine, the same thing we did when we went from a strictly what was in medicine called allopathic, which only has to do with external remedies, to an integrative whole person response, where we don't just talk about physical issues, we talk about psychological issues and emotional issues, we talk about nutrition, we talk about all kinds of things that have to do with creating health. And we know that sickness is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of sickness. What we're doing with this campaign is forging an integrative whole person model of politics. Why is that? Because just as with medicine, if you really want to heal the society, just as if you really want to heal the body, you can't just approach the issues on the external levels. We have to go deeper. And that is what we're doing with this campaign. We are having deeper conversations. When it comes to our economy, when it comes to the condition of America's children, when it comes to race relations, when it comes to waging peace and preparing for war, when it comes to climate change, we have to do more than just water the leaves. We have to water the roots, and the roots are inside us. So I want to talk to you about this on two levels. I want to talk to you about it in terms of what I'm saying to people out on the campaign trail, and I want to talk to you about it in terms of your involvement. We have gotten to the point in the United States where we're kind of like politics as a spectator sport. It's almost like politicians are doing what they do, and politics is this field over there, and it's all just about them, you know. It's kind of like how we used to look at doctors. We don't look at doctors that way anymore. We know that we're responsible for our health, and doctors are consultants, right? Okay, so we have this thing with politicians just drop in every 2 years or every 4 years, and they say, send me to Washington and I'll fix it. But we know now that it's not as simple as that. Something has gone wrong in our society. And when things go wrong in politics, it affects how things go wrong in us. But when things go wrong in us, it affects how things go wrong in politics. So this campaign has to involve all of us at a deeper level. All of us at a deeper level, not only in terms of helping us get elected. It's got to be deeper than that. It's about all of us getting involved with the dimension of our citizenship that maybe we had not really expanded into before. And then when we actually win the election, it has to continue. It can't just be, okay, you're dismissed now, we won. This has got to be a shift in all of us. It's Martin Luther King said there has to be a quantitative shift in our circumstances and a qualitative shift in our souls. So we have to begin with a qualitative shift in our souls. And that qualitative shift in our souls has got to be that we realize our responsibility. It's a shift in your soul when you realize, you know, I'm responsible not just for my own life, but as a citizen, I'm responsible for what happens in this country. And as a citizen of the world, I'm interested in what happens in the world. Each and every one of us are immune cells. And so much of what's happened in this country and in this world that we don't like are like opportunistic infections that would not have occurred had the immune cells been more vital. So I'm calling you to join with me, not just to help me get elected. I want you to join with me in each and every one of you in your own life, thinking of yourself as a surrogate for this campaign. It's not just that I'm trying to go into a deeper conversation. I'm inviting you to go into a deeper conversation with me. I'm inviting you to go to the website, Marianne 2020. Or you can get there, I think, at this point, if you just put Marianne for president or Marianne Williamson for president or whatever. And you go there, and if you look at the issues, and first of all, read my bio, read, all of the material that's on there so that it becomes your own. And then in the section on issues, and we took the immigration one down because I'm rewriting a lot of it, so that one's not there right now. But if you actually read, and it's not all easy reading, but take, one day, sit down, read what we talk about in there on all these various issues, because the point is not just you looking at the website to see whether or not I agree with you that you want to vote for me. It's got to be deeper than that. It's got to be so that you too join with me. Americans have to enter into a deeper place. And I wrote a book called The Politics of Love. It's not out yet, but it's got a lot of the philosophical, it's called, Handbook for a New American Revolution, a Revolution of Consciousness. That is how we will wage this campaign. We will wage this campaign because we are creating a field of energy and a field of activism. But before there can be activism, there has to be activation. So I'm asking you to allow, which actually has already happened, or you wouldn't be on this call. Every time somebody has sent in $10, $20, $100, $250, it was some activation that led them to do that. That you got on this call tonight. There's some activation that you put something on Facebook or put something on Twitter or something on Instagram. That's where the power lies. The power lies in us. The power does not lie out there. That's why we have to change the entire economic thinking of our society and of our world, away from production out there to creation from in here. That is the source of our economic vitality. It is the source of peace on earth. It's when people are aligned with the better angels of our nature, with our wisdom, with our goodness, and we act that way. And so it's got to be a change in our communities. It's got to be a change in our relationships. It's got to be a change in our relationship with our parents and our children and our lovers and our friends and our spouses. Everything that we relate with. And politics is just one more area. So if we want things to be in moral and spiritual alignment with ethics and values and goodness in our own lives, all we're talking about is a politics that is an extension of that. The question is not just, am I good? Is the country good? Lyndon Johnson, we remember Lyndon Johnson, unfortunately, because of the Vietnam War, which was a horrible, horrible mistake. But domestically, he had a war on poverty. Domestically, he talked about creating the good society. We need to return to that kind of thinking. Do we have a good society? Now, for 35 years, I've been in a career where, like many of you, reading, writing, talking about how we transform our lives from fear to love. And when we do transform our lives from fear to love, miracles happen. Things right themselves. The world is self-organizing, like cells in the body are self-organizing. But also when the body gets sick, the body has an immune system so that it is self-correcting. It is repairable. That's how a society works as well. When all the pieces of the society, all the individuals and all the institutions are behaving and participating and collaborating with other pieces of the system from our highest, best place, it works. And then when things have gotten off course, because we're not, you have to go through the process of being honest, taking, in personal terms, like in AA, when they talk about taking a serious moral inventory. That's what a country has to do too. So the message of this campaign is that the country is off course. It is off course economically. It is off course in terms of the way millions of American children are trapped in constant and chronic trauma. It's off course in our race relations. It's off course in the way we do more to prepare for war than to wage peace. And so we need to, and once again, it can't be just me, it has to be all of us. We need to articulate another way. because there is another way. But the way out of this ditch is not with the same mindset that got us into this ditch. The same mindset that got us into this ditch can't get us out of it. So this campaign, by articulating another way, and it's the same way of saying, same thing as saying, we articulating a way to go deeper into the heart of the matter. So let's talk about what that means. Let's talk about what I've been saying on the campaign trail. And also I want to give you some details about what a presidential campaign is. I know a lot of you already know this, but just in case some of you don't. There are 4 early primary states, and they all vote. In some states it's a vote, in some states it's called a caucus, which is slightly different. And they are all 4 in February 2020. The first one is February 3rd in Iowa. And the last one is the last, I think it's the 29th of February, which is South Carolina. And in between, there is New Hampshire and Nevada, which I find that just so kind of wonderful. I mean, all the power in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. There's something very democratic about that. Those are the people who decide. How those 4 primaries go is what will determine the political conversation in this country for the next 2 years and possibly beyond that. That's why all the presidential candidates now are just moving into Iowa, South Carolina, Nevada, New Hampshire. This is where it happens, right? So that is where I'll be. That's where all of them are. So I want you to think in terms of your consciousness and your intention, please. We have to win Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. We have to come in the top 3 in more than one to still remain in the race. Because if you start falling off, people stop giving you money for your campaign, et cetera. And there are so many candidates and you have to poll at a certain place in order to be in the debates. So that's what it's about. So what this campaign is doing is articulating a message that I'm about to go deeper into with you. And then in order for us to compete, and I assume you all saw the ABC Nightline thing that was on the other night. And if you haven't, please go to Marianne 2020 because it's on there, the CNN piece. And I hope that you are posting these things on your Facebook and posting them on your Twitter and posting them on your Instagram, as best you can post on Instagram, and talking this up. That is what we have. We don't have anywhere near the money that the traditional candidates have because they're coming in with $10, $11 million. We don't have that. We hopefully will get there. But it's like you need the money to get there. And then when you get there, it creates more money and so forth. But right now, let's talk about the energy that we do have. And the energy that we do have is in the vertical. If you know my work, I've been talking about it for a long time. The world doesn't change on the horizontal, the world changes on the vertical. Because on the horizontal is where you tend to dumb down your message so you don't upset anybody, and you try to please everybody, and then you try to stitch together a constituency, and then you win. It's not authentic. It's not deep, fierce truth-telling. It's just watering the leaves and not the roots, and it's the same old, same old. Now we need to elect, in my opinion, we need to elect a Democrat, and I will do everything, whether I am the nominee or anyone else is the nominee, to support the Democrat, because I wouldn't do anything to risk even taking 10 votes away from the Democrat in the 2020, particularly given what our situation is today. However, if all we do is send a better version of same old, same old, same old, same old is a political perspective that is too superficial. It's too shallow for the kinds of transformative energies that we need in order to really forge another way. In order to truly forge another way, we have to become deeper thinkers. We have to become more involved in our own citizenship. If this country is to be we the people, the employer has responsibilities just like the employee does. So theoretically, technically, our politicians work for us. But do you hire somebody and just check in on them every 2 years or every 4 years? We have to know what's going on because it's a field of consciousness. And what has happened is that too many Americans have sort of chronically checked out. And then it becomes so toxic because too many people are chronically checked out. So then too many people say, well, I don't want to be part of it because it's so toxic. It's not going to transform unless we get in there. And being involved in politics, and when it's an integrative whole person pursuit, is just as beautiful as being involved in anything else. That's what Gandhi meant when he said that politics should be sacred. He didn't mean it should be religious. This is not about religious dogma or doctrine, but he meant about entering into the conversation at the deepest possible level. So let's talk now about what this conversation is, which is the conversation that I've been having in Iowa. It's the conversation I've been having in New Hampshire. It's the conversation I've been having in South Carolina. Just got back from South Carolina last night. 2 days from now, I'm going back out to go to New Hampshire. Then I'm going to Boston. Then I'm going to LA. You know, I'm out there. I'm out there to the best of my ability. And with your help, it's all for a wonderful, wonderful purpose. Okay, let's start. Let's start with the economy. I know a lot of us, particularly women, thought of the word economics. And it's kind of dry. It's what economists think about. It's what politicians think about. And so a lot of us thought, well, you know, economics is over there and we're over here. But you might have heard me say that I don't care what the public issue is, it will get to your private door. So about 40 years ago, actually exactly 40 years ago, when Ronald Reagan was elected president, there was this economic worldview. And this economic worldview was such that the belief that market forces should become the dominant organizing principle of our society was brought to the fore in this amazing way. And billions of dollars were spent with propaganda behind it, helping to elect campaigns, helping to elect, you know, politicians. Before that, the idea, like when I was growing up, was that a corporation had a moral responsibility. That the corporation, yes, it owed to its stockholders to try to increase profit for the stockholders. That goes without saying in a business. But it used to be that it was also considered that there was a moral responsibility to the other stakeholders. So that it was, whether it was the workers or the community or the environment, that the corporation had more than a fiduciary responsibility to the stockholder, that the corporation also had a moral and an ethical responsibility to the other stakeholders, the workers, the community, the environment. About 40 years ago, there were people who said, no, it shouldn't work that way. The way it should work is that corporations have one responsibility and one responsibility only. And that is not an ethical responsibility, not a moral or an ethical responsibility, but that the corporation has a responsibility only to increase the profit for its stockholders. And then, because so much more profit will be created for these corporations because they won't have to be bothered by things like regulations, safety regulations, or health regulations, or any kind of ethical consideration, all this money will be made, and then that money will trickle down. And that will that rising tide will lift all boats. Trickle down economics, it's called. Well, that has not lifted all boats. It has left millions of people without even a life vest or a raft. It has destroyed the middle class. We had a thriving middle class in the 1950s. And so what this has done is created the greatest wealth inequality in 100 years. Now, why is that? Now, just think this through. It's not some abstract something out there. It's something that affects all our lives. Because what it has done, it has taken the government into this place where the government has become whatever the corporations want, whatever the corporations want. And especially since the Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court, where unlimited corporate funds can just flood the system, our government has been essentially turned into a system of legalized bribery, where so much money floods the system that even though in the Declaration of Independence it says that governments are instituted among men to secure the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which God gave to everyone. Instead, our government is not, the way Lincoln described it in the Gettysburg Address, of the people, by the people, and for the people, but really of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. And that's not overstating it. Because now, look at your Environmental Protection Agency. The Environmental Protection Agency obviously should be led by a world-class environmental scientist. It should be led by environmental scientists. It should be filled with environmental scientists. But it is now led by an ex-executive from the chemical companies. And before that, it was the executive and lobbyists from the oil companies. So this, which was set up by Republican President Richard Nixon, the Environmental Protection Agency now does more to advocate for the short-term profit maximization of fossil fuel companies and chemical companies than it does to advocate for the safety of the earth. So that here we're living with this situation where climate change actually poses an existential threat to our humanity, to the survival of the human race. But they've gutted the Clean Water Act and they've gutted the Clean Air Act, and they've overturned the ban on pesticides that we know harm a child's brain. Why? So that these corporations can make more money. I mean, it's insane, really. And I'm not saying it's kind of insane or saying insane metaphorically. It's insane. But it's a product of the fact, just like when an individual has no conscience and no ethics, what do you call this person? When a person has no sense of remorse or any sense of moral or ethical responsibility to anyone other than themselves, that's a sociopath. This is a sociopathic economic theory that is now the crux of our economic system. There's no ethics there. There's no morals there. If children have to have their brains harmed by this pesticide, well, the chemical companies get to make more money. I mean, somebody might say that's overstating it. It's actually not overstating it. It is describing it accurately. And on down the line. So we don't have proper environmental protection to, make it easier for oil companies and chemical companies. We don't have a protection of our food like we should. We're losing our topsoil and our farmland because of agribusiness. I mean, you look at big pharma and you look at health insurance companies and oil companies and chemical companies and military contractors. It's not even covert. It's not a covert takeover of the US government. It's actually a very overt takeover of the US government. In the current administration, the first Secretary of State, instead of being a great humanitarian and a great diplomat because he's handling the relationships with other nations, he was an ex-CEO of Exxon, an oil company. Because it's all leading with this corporatization. Now, I'm not saying corporations don't have a place. Corporations do have a place, although when you look at the jobs created by major corporations, and then you look at the jobs created by the smaller businesses create almost as many jobs as these giant corporations. But they have become this new big brother in America. So these companies that make already profits of billions of dollars, they're already making profits of billions of dollars, we are subsidizing them more. And the word subsidy is interesting. Martin Luther King said, if they give it to rich people, they call it a subsidy. And if they give it to poor people, they call it a handout. That's why some people call it corporate welfare. I mean, we subsidize companies that are already making billions of dollars. An example, in 2017, the tax bill that cost $2 trillion, $2 trillion, 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very, very richest and the wealthiest people and corporations. 83 cents of every dollar. And then they made those tax cuts permanent. And then they passed the middle class tax cuts as part of that, which I actually support, but they're only temporary for 10 years. Now, it's so funny because anytime we want to talk about doing something that actually serves people, they say, how are you going to pay for it? But we're not supposed to say how you're going to pay for it when they want a $2 trillion tax cut or a $2 trillion war, such as Iraq, that turns out to be the most tragic era in American history. So this is happening all down the line. And it has created what we would call in real life a theft. It's just a theft from the public treasury. And it has made a small group of people, the proverbial 1%, which is really more the 1% of the 1%. We have 400 people in America. 400 people, listen to this, who own as much wealth as the bottom 150 million people, which is 60% of all the people in the United States. So really think about that. You've got 150 people. Oh, no, excuse me, 150 million people, the wealth of all 150 million people, and then 400 people. 400 people. It's just so, it's unsustainable. All you have to do is read Yertle the Turtle. Remember Yertle the Turtle when we were kids? Everything's in Dr. Seuss. If you read Yertle the Turtle, you see it's unsustainable. It never worked. It doesn't. I read this book called Gardens of Democracy, which I highly recommend. And I hope you'll start book clubs, because I think that's part, we need to read about American history. We need to read, anyway, one of these is Gardens of Democracy. And they likened it to if you took all the blood in your body and put it in one arm. It's just unsustainable. And Louis Brandeis, who was a Supreme Court justice, a late Supreme Court justice, said you can have large amounts of wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You can't have both. Because in 1776, when this country was established, it was established to repudiate and overturn aristocracy. And aristocracy is where only a few people are entitled to own the land, and only a few people are entitled to an education, and only a few people are entitled to make their dreams come true. That's really what we're talking about here. It's self-actualization. It's everything we talk about in our personal lives. Can I do it? Can I be everything I can be? Can I spread my wings? That's what the dream of America is, that everybody can rise to their fullest, and that we will, to the best of our ability, remove the conditions that shackle people and keep them from doing that. That's what our Declaration of Independence is about. It's that all men are created equal. All men have unalienable rights of life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. That governments are instituted among men to ensure those rights. Now, when the Declaration was written, 1776, and signed, 41 of the signers were themselves slave owners. So we've never fully actualized this dream. It's always been our aspiration. And in every generation, there are those whose hearts, which include you and me in this generation, and we wouldn't be here having this conversation, our hearts are ablaze with the possibilities that lie in doing this. But then there have always been those who thought it wasn't a very good idea, because they wanted to own slaves, they wanted to suppress women, they wanted segregation. There have always been those in every generation who said no to what is really the American dream. But over time, we tend to self-correct. So we had slavery, but then we had abolition, and we had not only genocide, but also cultural annihilation of the Native Americans. But even now you have a rise in consciousness. You have people at Standing Rock. You have those arguing, as I do, for the return of the Black Hills of South Dakota to the Sioux, because it was promised in a treaty in 1863. We have many treaties that were signed with Native American tribes, but we've always gotten out of actually holding up our end of the deal. It's time to do that. And we had suppression of women, but then we had the women's suffragette movement. We had segregation and white supremacy institutionalized in the American South, but then we had the civil rights movement. So those are always specific examples of this aristocratic mentality. Today, it's not a specific institutional reality, because when it's a specific institutional reality, like slavery, you have to get rid of slavery. Institutional reality like segregation, Civil Rights Act, you dismantle segregation. Oppression of women, you have giving women suffrage, the passage of the 19th Amendment. Now it's not a specific, it's a mindset. And it's got its tentacles around everything. It's like the new big brother. it's this bottom line, whatever the corporation wants, whatever the corporation wants, whatever the business wants, and whatever the business wants. And it doesn't matter who gets hurt. It doesn't matter, they take the power away from the FDA so that the FDA, you're raised thinking, well, this food is really dangerous. We don't have to worry because there's a government agency, and that government agency isn't going to, let them make bad food that would be bad for us. But in too many cases, the FDA has now had all of its power taken away. All it can do is politely recommend and suggest to the corporation to basically consider taking this food off the shelf. Because the whole mantra of this mindset is get rid of the government, get rid of the government. But it wasn't, a healthy skepticism about the power of the government is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with a healthy skepticism. But they've just translated it onto corporations. If we should have a healthy skepticism about the overreach of government, we should also have a healthy skepticism about the overreach of capitalism. And that is the tradition in America. That is always what Americans have done. That's why we have child labor laws. That's why we have unions. That's why we had antitrust and anti-monopoly legislation, although now it's hardly even prosecuted. So it's this encroaching mindset. And we have politicians on one side who've just been bought into it completely, and then other politicians who, haven't bought into it completely, but there's still this moral equivocation. That's the problem with our government today, is moral equivocation, because it's playing both sides. It's playing both sides. One doesn't even pretend, and the other, I'm really upset about it, but we're still playing footsies under the table too often with some political entities. By the way, I'm not running against anyone in this campaign. I'm running with a lot of really smart, good people. And so I think it's healthy for our democracy and healthy for the Democratic Party that so many people are running. It's an all hands on deck type of moment. So everybody should be putting out their ideas. Now, there are three particular areas where I want to talk about the devastation that has been wrought by what is essentially an aristocratic mindset. That's what's happened in America. We have reverted to an aristocratic system. It is a veiled aristocracy. We are not functioning as a vital democracy. We're not. It's like in my personal work, with personal transformation, I always say by the time people come to me, things aren't going well, and you expect me to lay it down and be real. And in personal transformation, you have to take responsibility. The United States has to look at our underbelly. That's what this campaign represents. Not in anger, not in self-hatred, not in cynicism. Cynicism is just an excuse for not helping, and whining is not an option. But we have to take a mature look. You don't need politicians. I'm going to go to Washington and fight for you. No. We all have to think about this, because for those of you who do not wish to see President Trump reelected, this is so much bigger than just defeating Trump, because those same forces will have somebody else in 22 and somebody else in 24. We have to get to the heart of the matter. We have to expose the darkness so it can be healed. Just like in personal transformation, you can't bring the light to the darkness. You got to bring the darkness to the light. Most political campaigns don't want to look deep into what's really going on. I don't know anything that other politicians don't know. I'm just willing to say some things that other politicians aren't willing to say. And that's because they're all this mindset, well, don't want to upset you or be negative or upset my donors. I'm like, we have to look at this. So I want to talk to you about three areas where the devastation wrought by this aristocratic worldview is a peril to our democracy. If you look at something like drugs and alcohol and people who have overdosed, et cetera, it's very clear that, the survival of the physical body cannot be guaranteed. But sometimes I think we're in this magical thinking, because we really have to get that the survival of our democracy is not guaranteed either. And the survival of the human race is not guaranteed. So, number one, there are millions of American children who live lives of chronic trauma. And I don't mean just a little trauma. Many of them live in what's called domestic war zones. The violence in their homes, their streets, their communities, their schools are such that psychologists tell us that the PTSD that is experienced by returning veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq is no more severe than the daily stress traumatic stress that's experienced by these children. Millions of them, they go to school hungry. They go to school in schools where they don't even have minimum safety standard requirements. And many of them, millions of them, in schools that do not have the school supplies necessary to adequately teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. These children are full-on citizens of the United States, so where's their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Well, they're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. They're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage. So in a basically corrupted political situation, where more attention is given to corporate demands, how can these children even begin to compete with the clout that is exerted by these corporations? So does the money go to help these children? No, the money is going to the $2 trillion tax cut, where 83 cents goes to out of every dollar goes to the very, very richest. So that what you've got is these children whose despair we have simply normalized. And if a person, it's child neglect. You know, if one person neglects a child, it's at best unethical and at worst criminal. But this is collective child neglect. So how's this going to get addressed? How's it going to get addressed? Do you think it's going to get addressed by some traditional politician who will not mention it? They talk about increased funding for education, but it goes so much deeper than that. So the issue is that the United States is the only country that bases our educational funding on property taxes. So a child living in a poor neighborhood will get a poorer education, which will only increase the trajectory of poverty. You know, I was in South Carolina. South Carolina, on one hand, the state has $1 billion surplus, but they refused Medicaid expansion because ideologically they didn't want that from government. So these children, I was listening to a woman who works with these wraparound services, all this anti-trauma work in schools, and 50 of the schools in her district are children in poverty, and with their budget, all they can do is help the children in 4 of those schools. They were just like, we're just leaving these children to, it's so immoral. That's the point of all this. An amoral economic system leads to immoral behavior. This is a moral issue. That's why the essence of this campaign is that the United States needs a moral and spiritual awakening. This is not, oh, that's about economics, or that's about politics. And especially, I love the one, Marianne, stay in your lane. What lane? In America, we're all citizens. Politics does not just, you know, we've developed this idea, well, people in politics understand about these things. Excuse me, if you're a human being, listening with your heart, you understand about these things. In a democracy, it's we the people, not them, the political elite. I mean, it's kind of crazy. You know, people say you don't understand government. Well, the idea that, you know, it's kind of like saying if someone is a good car mechanic, and that's what, you know, political experts, there are wonderful political experts in this country and some very experienced politicians, but wisdom isn't about political mechanics. You know, experienced politicians took us into Vietnam, experienced politicians took us into Iraq, experienced politicians led us to the largest wealth inequality since 1929. That what's missing is not just political mechanics. And your car mechanic, that might be the best car mechanic in the world, but that's not necessarily the person who knows what road we should take to Milwaukee. And that's where we are now. We need to bring our heart into this. Next issue, race in America. You know, one of the things we talk about in any kind of personal or spiritual transformation is how we have to look at our own character defects. We have to atone for our mistakes and make amends and get straight with God. And where we've been wrong, make things right. Now, I don't want to minimize the successes of the past. I don't want to minimize any of the efforts, black or white, of our ancestors in bringing the issue of race into greater reconciliation since slavery. But in many ways, we're sliding backwards. I mean, even the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965 to ensure that people of color, the Black people in the South, would be able to have voting rights, they started chipping away at that in 2013, the Supreme Court did. And then as soon as that happened, all these voter suppression efforts you hear about all over the country, specifically aimed at people of color and disenfranchised communities. And when you look at mass incarceration and you look at racial disparity in our criminal sentencing, we're actually sliding backwards. I don't think the average American is a racist. I don't at all. But I think that most Americans are woefully undereducated about the history of race in this country, particularly since the Civil War. So I urge you to read up about all this. And at the end of the Civil War, it's fascinating history. And you can, once again, if you look on my website at Marianne 2020, I've written about all of this. At the end of the Civil War, once the federal troops left in 1877, which was, the war was over in 1865, 1877, the federal troops left, and they were there to ensure that slavery would not be instituted. Once they left, many of the Southern legislatures passed what were called Black Code laws to ensure that the former slave population could not have, would have subpar social and political and economic opportunity. So just think about it. You were a slave. You're not a slave anymore, but what are you going to do? You have to make a living. And if you'd been a slave, you certainly had a skill set. It was forced labor, but you certainly knew what to do with the land because you'd been working other people's land as a slave. So what was promised to a family of 4 former slaves was 40 acres and a mule. Which, you know, we say that now almost like it's quaint, but think what 40 acres and a mule would have done for that family. Well, very few of those were given. Most that were given were then taken back once the federal troops left. And at that, with those Black Code laws, lynchings, which were hanging of Black people and also of white people who would help them, Ku Klux Klan, John Birch Society. By the end of that century into like the year 1900, you've got full-on institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South. So be really clear that you'd had 2.5 centuries of slavery, because slavery really started in the 1600s, and it got really big at the beginning of the 1800s with the cotton industry. That's over at the Civil War, 1865. And then there follows another 100 years of violence against Black people in America. It wasn't the violence of slavery, but that doesn't mean it wasn't perpetration of violence. And none of that was fundamentally addressed until Dr. King in the 1960s, and Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. And Dr. King had gone to India to study the principles of nonviolence and bring them over to the United States for application to the struggle for civil rights. Dr. King used to say, yeah, we were freed, but what were we freed to? Economic reconciliation. You had about 4 million slaves that were freed at the end of the Civil War. Some people say 4, some people say 5. Somewhere probably between 4 and 5 million people who were not given the opportunity to reintegrate economically. So at first they didn't have political power, and then that was addressed with the Civil Rights Movement. They couldn't even vote. That was addressed with the Civil Rights Act. There was full-on segregation. They couldn't sit at the lunch counter. They couldn't be in the front of the bus, all those things we know. Many of those issues have been addressed, but that economic piece never was. And to this day, former descendants of slaves, still, if you're a genius, no matter who you are, and this is not nothing, you can make it in America. So let's say if you're Black, you're Tyler Perry, or you're an Oprah Winfrey, or Michael Jordan. Definitely, things have improved in the sense that no matter who you are in America, if you're a genius, you can break out. But that's not justice, to say you have to be a genius and you can make it. Justice is when everyone has an equal opportunity. So I think we should pay reparations for slavery. We should have a plan of reparations for slavery, just as Germany has paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations since World War II, which has been a large part of the reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Germany and the rest of Europe. And in 1988, President Reagan signed an American Civil Liberties Act, where the people who had been interned, I think it was 200,000 people have been interned. Would you look that up, Wendy? I think it was 200,000 people, how many were interned in the Japanese internment camps. Each surviving member of the camps was given either $20,000 or $22,000. I think, you know, in the transformational community, there's a lot of talk about small random acts of kindness. America needs to do some huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. And that's why I think the conversation about reparations, it's back on, or I hope this campaign puts it back there. People like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Sandy Darity, a lot of people, very smart people, have been doing a lot of work on this conversation. And with this campaign, 120,000, Wendy just said. She looked it up, 120,000 people who were interned, Wendy, during World War II in the Japanese internment camps. And the last major pillar is our national security. Just as the economic system that I was talking about before, it has nothing to do with planning long-term economic good. All it's done is created the greatest wealth inequality since 1929. If we really want economic vibrancy in this country, 10 years from now, you take better care of your 10-year-olds today. And that's why we should have a massive realignment of our investment in the direction of children, 8 years old, 10 years old, and younger. If I'm president, one of the first things I do, have a big conclave. Okay, I want everybody who knows anything about early childhood. I want the psychologists, I want the neurologists, and I want the elementary school teachers in here. I want to hear from them and the nutritionists, by the way. What do we have to do to give the children of the United States the chance to be the people that they are capable of being? If you want to see the real vibrancy, if you want to see the real energy that will make this country everything that it can be 10 years from now and 20 years from now, you take care of the children of today. By the way, you know what country knows this? China. America is so far behind, and it's what's going to put us behind economically as well as on every other level 10 years from now and 20 years from now, if we do not start addressing the fact that the real genius and the potential of this country can be found in every kindergarten in this country. I don't care what neighborhood you're in. And then you just watch children just being capped, their dreams being capped. In the 21st century, we must begin to think differently. We're either going to develop the brain or we're going to be developing the bombs. We have to evolve. And that includes how we see climate change and how we see international relations. Just like our economic system has nothing to do with planning long-term economic good, our national defense strategy has nothing to do with planning peace on this earth. For the same reason, short-term profit maximization is placed before any real agenda for peace. This is not a critique of the military, by the way. I have great respect for the military. Any critique here is a critique of the civilian leadership that leads it. Because right now we spend, like this year, we'll be spending $718 billion on the military. But Donald Rumsfeld, who was the defense secretary under George Bush, used to say that we must also know how to wage peace. And the General Mattis, who was Secretary of Defense until recently, said, if you're not going to fully fund the State Department, I'm going to have to buy more ammunition. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that the State Department, which is diplomacy and the kind of humanitarian efforts that actually wage peace, we pay it this much, and for military efforts to prepare for war, we pay this much. They should be equal. It's just like your health. You don't just pay for medicine, you seek to proactively cultivate health of the body. For every dollar that we spend on peace building, we spend something like $1,000 on preparing for war, even though the soft powers of humanitarian peace building efforts are far more efficacious. It's just that they don't make any money, any corporate dollars. If we want to wage peace on the earth, we expand economic opportunities for women, we expand educational opportunities for children, and we ameliorate unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. Large groups of desperate people should be seen as a national security risk because desperate people do desperate things. And desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, whether that's in a corner of a city in the United States with gangs or a corner of the world with a terrorist organization. So we should have a far more robust peace-building agenda, waging peace, So our military should be in a far more equal partnership, which I think they would like. This is not something they're against. This just has to do with corporate dollars. Even the man now who is the acting head of our Defense Department was a 30-year executive at Boeing. And just to give you one more little piece of bad news on that one, the US Air Force has ordered 100 B-21 Raiders. The B-21 Raiders, this is just an example of the insanity, and I do mean insanity. B-21 Raiders cost $550 million each. Each airplane costs $550 million. And they all carry, or are equipped to carry, both conventional and nuclear bombs. So when I talk about whole person politics, take that in with your whole person. Why do we need 100 airplanes that carry both conventional and nuclear bombs? Because, you know, if you drop 5 nuclear bombs, that's over for human civilization as we know it. And you drop 10 of those, it's over for the human race as we know it. This earth wouldn't be habitable for at least 250,000 years. That's how corrupt it is. That's how crazy it is. And that's not going to change unless we rise up. And we're not going to rise up within the container of political campaigns that don't even mention these things. I don't know anything that the other people running don't know, but I'm naming them because the political establishment doesn't want to upset you. But we have to look at this. We have to look at these things. And then we can heal from these things. You know, slavery was followed by abolition, and segregation was followed by the civil rights movement, and the oppression of women was followed by suffragette movement. And we too can self-correct. We too can course correct and put this country back on course. But every time that we've done this in the past, it's been because of spiritual voices. You know, abolition arose from the early evangelicals and the Quakers. Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. So this idea of somebody talking about a spiritual vision should stay out of it. It's crazy, because that's what we're lacking in this country. You know, the spiritual mind, all that spirituality is the path of the heart. An economic system that has no heart is like a person that has no heart. Our institutions should have ethics. Our institutions should have morals. Our institutions should have values. You know, there are private moral issues and there are public moral issues. Mass incarceration is immoral. Neglecting all those children is immoral. Spending all your money on preparing for war and not spending money, taking money away from things that actually wage peace, that's immoral. Not addressing your deep character defects as a country, just like you would as an individual. This isn't how you repair your life, and it won't be how you repair your country. Our national defense strategy has nothing to do with really planning for peace in 50 years or 25 years. Our economics doesn't have anything to do with planning for economic vibrancy in 10 or 25 years. And none of that is going to be fundamentally disrupted unless we weigh in. And that's why I'm running for president. And I hope you'll help me, because I'm very serious about this, as you know. And I'm out there in Iowa, and I'm out there in New Hampshire, I'm out there in South Carolina. I'm not out there in Nevada yet, but I'll get there. And it goes without saying, I really need your help. I need your help on 2 levels. I need your help because this can't just be one person saying it. It has to be a rising buzz of people going, what are we doing? And talking about these things. You know, Eisenhower said the American mind at its left was both liberal and conservative. I'm obviously a progressive in my politics. But the opponent of our democracy is not conservatism. The opponent of our democracy is corporatism. And corporatism isn't any more conservative than it is liberal. It's anti-American, though, because it's an aristocratic viewpoint. And it is promulgated by people who don't really hate you or me. They just find democracy inconvenient. This isn't about individuals. This is about systems. This isn't about demonizing individuals. This is about recognizing systems, some of which are unfair, unjust, undemocratic. We're not functioning as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We're functioning as a government of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. And it's perilous to our democracy and to our planet. I hope you'll read up on the issues on Marianne2020.com. I hope that if you feel this campaign is talking about things that you care about, that you think are real, also it goes without saying, climate change is an existential threat to the human race. Once again, why aren't we fighting climate change, as I talked about? Because our environmental policy is run more by short-term profit maximization for fuel companies, fossil fuel companies, etc. I need you, if you feel moved, I need you to dive down into these things just like I am. Read up on my site, have book clubs, talk about it. Post about all this on your Facebook, post about it on your Twitter. Go to, at mar.com, at Mar Williamson, and tag me, and Instagram, all that stuff, just build buzz. And please help me fund this campaign. It's mind-boggling. Most of the traditional candidates, they come into this with $10, $11 million. And it's not mysterious what you need. It's like we have, let's say, 2 people on staff in Iowa, 2 people on staff in South Carolina, 2 people on staff in New Hampshire. Sounds good. Well, the issue is the traditional candidates have 10 people on staff in Iowa, 10 people on staff in New Hampshire, 10 people on staff in South Carolina. Take a state like Iowa, it's got 99 precincts. So it's not like we don't have energy. It's not like we don't have people coming to the events, because we do. There's such a hunger in America for a deeper, more real, more authentic conversation about what's happening, but you need an infrastructure to be able to contain it, to hold it. So for that, we need money. It's as simple as that. There's just so much volunteers can and will do. I hope that you will support the campaign, and I hope that you will try to get other people to support the campaign. And I'm not asking you to go beyond your comfort zone. If $10 is comfortable for you, please send $10. If 15, 20, 25, 100, 150, 200, some of you more. You can pay up to as much as $2,800. Some of you might be blessed financially, and you feel like, I really want to see this happen. I think with our own lives, it's just like with our country, how you spend your money expresses your values. So please look into your own heart. See if you feel that this campaign should exist, which I'm hoping you feel, because you're on this call. So I certainly want to hear from you. You can go to Marianne2020.com. Look into the volunteer section, right? Isn't that what it is? Go to where it says volunteer. See all the things. It's Marianne2020.com/volunteer. You'll see all of the categories for volunteering. And you'll see all the things that you can do with Jess, with all the various people on the campaign who will work with you in places where you can help make a difference. Go to the store and buy things that are there, raising money for the campaign. And use your voice. Talk to your friends, share, whether it was the ABC piece or the CNN interview. There will be more media that's coming out. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions that they have put in there? Hold on, because let me see if you have some questions. What are your plans to increase visibility and support for your candidacy? I saw your appearance on CNN recently. It was impressive. I believe many others would agree. I'm unsure they know. Well, I'm not sure they know. Exactly. I mean, it's so funny. I was watching Meet the Press last week, and it's like I don't exist. But then on the other hand, on MSNBC Today, and you can see this on my social media, when they pit the women candidates, Marianne Williamson is on there. It's like, some of the sort of media establishment, they're just going to pretend I don't exist long enough and maybe I'll go away. That's clearly their strategy for some of them, but some of them not. I thought John Berman on CNN was very generous to me. I really thought that was a very fair and kind interview. I thought the ABC Nightline was so wonderful. Al Sharpton I was on. So we're like a little engine that could, but we're getting there. The point is, the stuff that you have seen, please put it out there. And certainly we're trying. Okay, if Reaganomics is not sustainable, what kind of economy would you like to foster as president? Capitalism with a conscience. Reaganomics is not free market capitalism. Adam Smith, who was the main articulator of early free market capitalism, said free market economy cannot exist outside an ethical center. Reaganomics is the idea that market forces, unfettered by any kind of regulation, any kind of ethics, should be the organizing principle of our society. I don't agree with that. I think democracy should be the organizing principle of our society. I think deep human values should be the organizing principle of our society. Reaganomics has had 40 years. All it's done is to destroy the middle class, create the biggest wealth inequality since 1929. I say you invest in those children particularly. Invest in people. Our power lies in unleashing the spirit of the American people. You know, the old economics says it's all about the means of production and who owns the means of production. I don't think that productivity comes from the outside. Productivity, the issue now is creating from the inside. Every single human being, everyone I've ever met, people want to produce and create and do something good and do something beautiful. But we need to allow people, give people more of a chance to thrive and to let their dreams flourish. That's where a peaceful, beautiful, and economically sustainable world comes from. This one says, the corruption is obviously deep within our systems of government. What as president can you do to minimize or eliminate the ability of corporations and special interest groups to interfere with the plight of regular people? First of all, you repeat these tax cuts to the very wealthiest are ridiculous and they should be repealed. You permanentize the middle class tax cuts. You also pass universal health care because so much of the stress and the anxiety, so many Americans live in constant stress. What do I do if I get sick? What do I do if one of my kids gets sick? How am I going to go to college? How am I going to pay these college loans? Take these shackles off people. Reinstate Glass-Steagall. There are so many ways that we have just given the resources of our government to this small group of corporate entities. So that's how you do it. It's kind of not, it's not rocket science, actually. The money that you keep giving to the very rich people, stop giving all the money to people who don't need it and invest instead, particularly in your children. We should have, there should be the most amazing matrix of schools in this country that goes through college and beyond, technical schools. Anybody wants to get educated in this country. I was saying to this young girl young woman at a college in Iowa, I said, the reason I want you and why I would want as your president for you to have universal health care, the reason I want to either cancel, we have $1.5 trillion of college loan debt. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be 20 years old and have $28,000 of debt. I can't, how do you live with that in your head? It's burdensome. No wonder everybody's so tense and anxious. And I was saying to this woman, I want this to be available to you. I want you to have college. I want you to have healthcare because I want you to create the good, the true, and the beautiful. That's how America is going to thrive, that people are going to produce the best that they can be. In addition to being a moral and spiritual leader, Martin Luther King was a politician in the strategic and cold sense too, as were other nonviolent leaders. Could you speak on how you think about that side of nonviolent action, how we integrate it into electoral politics? Specifically, I wonder about your views on approach to the debates where the preponderance of political science evidence suggests our vote moving from, I'm not sure what that is, but I'm running for president. I don't know how much more involved I can be in the electoral process. So I think that the fact that I'm doing this shows that I am seeking to integrate both the message of nonviolence, which is simply that, as Gandhi and King said, love not only heals our personal relationships, but love can heal all political and social and economic relationships as well. Love is not over here while economics and social and political issues should be over there. Love is the core of right living, and it is that which makes life workable. And where life is not working, it is that which brings life back. I love how you want to lead healing the country and the world. I love how you want to encourage a discussion. The country's off. Since you understand it's about going deeper, are you open to having discussions on the issues with people? Yes, am I trying to talk deep to people? Yeah, that's what I'm out there trying to do. I mean, that's what I'm doing all day, every day to the best of my ability. Modern monetary theory. Yeah, that's Stephanie Kelton. I mean, I understand it. I understand both sides of the modern monetary theory. I understand you just print the money, but I also understand the possible problems in that. Would it be accurate to describe the appointment? These are all basically just, says one of the tragedies of the last presidential election was that homelessness was not mentioned once, poverty was barely mentioned. Most comments and policies target the middle class and the wealthy. That's the point, ladies and gentlemen. Most of the political conversation is just talking about how I'm going to make you happier or how I'm going to make you happier. You know, I'm not talking to the black or the white or the brown in you. I'm not talking to the Jew or the Muslim or the Hindu or the Buddhist or the Christian or the agnostic or the atheist in you. I'm not talking to the gay in you or the straight in you or the fluid in you or the transgender in you. I'm talking to the American in you. Because there's got to be a unity in our diversity. That's the foundational principle of e pluribus unum, that we are many different cultures and many ethnicities and different religions and different, you know, some people are wild and hip and some people are more staid and traditional. And that's good, that's fine. But we all have to have fealty to these same common principles. And those are the American principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is God's inalienable right to everyone, to the idea that all men are created equal, that there's freedom of religion here, that there's freedom of speech here, and that our government is of the people, by the people, and for the people, and that we are a nation of laws and no one is above them. If those principles are only inscribed on marble walls and they're not inscribed in our hearts, then they lose their moral force. And in the Jewish religion, it is said that every generation must discover God for itself. And every generation of Americans has to find, you know, that activation has to occur within us where we find within ourselves our love for these principles. This is so much bigger than I have rights. It's so much bigger than that. Democracy gives us more than rights. It gives us responsibilities. A responsibility to, in our time, in the chapter that every generation writes, to foster things where they're good and to repair things where they're broken. There's an old Talmudic saying that you are not expected to complete the task, but neither are you allowed to no longer involve yourself in the effort. You cannot desist from the effort. And I also think that's what we all really want, is to feel that our lives matter and are meaningful. And that's my biggest hope for this campaign, is that you feel that by being part of this, by reading on those issues, by having people to your house, by having book groups, by participating in these citizen calls, having people over, talking about these things, thinking about these things, that you're deepening your own understanding and participating more deeply. Not going to always be fun. Like therapy isn't always fun. Deep conversation isn't always fun, but it's real. And that's what it's not that I'm hoping for, it's what we're doing here. We're having a deep and real and fiercely authentic conversation about what's really going on in this country, because that's the only way to repair it. I meet people every day, everywhere I go. Every single situation, there are already people practicing what would heal us. People who are working on environmental alternatives, people who are working on alternatives to homelessness and poverty, people who are working on alternatives in terms of agriculture and organic food, people who are working on how things could work, but they are undersourced and under-resourced by our government and the governments of the world. If I'm president, it's not going to be that way. It's going to be different than that, because I believe in my heart that we can consider the possibility that there's another way. That's what I'm seeking to articulate on this campaign. And if I'm ever president of the United States, it's what I will articulate for the nation. I am so grateful to you that you're on this call. So grateful to you that you're joining with me. I hope that you will support the campaign in any way that you can. And together, I have absolutely no doubt we can do something really, really great. We can even win. Thank you. God bless you, and I look forward to hearing from you. To those of you in these states that I'm going to be in, I look forward to seeing you and seeing you soon. God bless and thank you.